Hello and welcome to the Creative Network. My name is Richard Tomlinson. I'm here at the Engine Room in Bridgewater. The Engine Room is home to Somerset Film. Somerset Film manages a project called Ignite Somerset that gets funding from Arts Council England. And I'm fortunate enough to work on that project. And each month I get to meet an artist working in the county, and we have a chat about their practice, their inspiration, and where they're hoping to go next with their work. And this month we're having a chat with Nick Bickford. So Nick, can you tell us where this all started for you? What was that initial thing in your life that drew you towards the arts and being an artist?
I'm told that I have an awful lot to say. In fact, people are always telling me to shut up. And I think it's because I'm a bit confused. I don't really know what I'm here for. What is this life? What is this about? What is the world? What is my position in the world? And what should I feel about all sorts of things, about poverty, about race and things like this. But I can't really get it across. People, I see them actually switching off when I open my mouth, which is getting quite bad. So I've been trying to develop ways of communication that are not just words. My writing's not great either. And I think I started off with various installations which sort of sitting on tables and all sorts of weird things. I think art was really the right area because it seemed to be there weren't any rules. You could really do what you liked. In fact, there was this weird thing is that nobody could really tell you what art was. There were always different opinions about it, or seems to be for me. So the big thing was art, and that was going to be what I was going to be for. That was how I was going to get through to everybody else, and I could sit there feeling, gosh, they all understand me now. So I sort of wasn't getting terribly far, but fortunately, thanks, I think, to various people, I started looking around at what other people were doing, about various artists around, this launched me onto all new sorts of directions. And I started drawing. I think the first lot was a fantasy land with lots of figures, and there were poverty-stricken peasants who did all the work, and there were academics who talked about it but didn't do anything. There were dancing figures who just had a lovely time, and fortunately, there were a few big fat guys with whips who kept it all in order. And so that kept me going for a while, but the drawing wasn't great. I looked around at what other people were doing. I also spent time actually talking to other people and working with other people. And I think that, so somewhere along the way, instead of being insular, I was becoming more open. And one group was particularly interesting, which I'm terribly proud to think it's 6 of us, of which 2 are professors. How I got to know 2 professors, I don't know. And a couple of artists and a couple of other people. And we talked about just about everything, but within a sort of artistic context. And there were various things that followed from that, and various workshops that I did. And I also did things with other people. I did quite a lot of clay, and so I was working with people doing clay. And the happiest moments when they talked about their lives as well. So they made things, but they described in detail their husband's problems and things like this,
So you arrived at that point in your practice where suddenly you're not working in isolation anymore, you're working collaboratively. So how did that affect your practice?
I think that it made me feel freer. And instead of worrying about whether I could draw or not, I began to think about perhaps I could put over the same kind of feelings by creating dynamic compositions, using bright colours or all sorts of colours and shapes and interacting in different ways. And there's one particular group that I did about 40 felt tip drawings, which just after I'd gone through a terrible trauma. And by the time I'd done all 40, I was feeling fine. So it dealt with a problem for me, this idea that I could express myself, and the fact that I didn't have to learn anything to do it, I just did it, which was fantastic.
So Nick, I know you mainly, more recently, through your animation, and I think a lot of people know you through your animation work. And recently we were fortunate enough to be able to project some of your animations on the windows here at the engine room. I think it was a December or January evening. It was quite dark and we had the projections running, and everybody in the kebab shop across the road from us came out and were watching your animations. It was brilliant. They're quite colourful, kind of frenetic, full of movement. They're quite mesmeric and hypnotic. After about 5 minutes, those people, that audience that we had, made their way back into the kebab shop. But tell me, why animation?
Well, you've got a static, something still. You make it move, and you're in a different ball game. It's hypnotic. And once I started, I couldn't stop. I think it also lent itself to the idea of things that weren't real things. And the great thing, what you drew could come to anything. And around about the same sort of time, I was hit on this terribly naive idea, but all my concerns that right at the back of this, the political things, were sort of saying, well, maybe us humans have had it really. You know, we're heading into a huge disaster. Why is that? Where did we go wrong? And then the big one was, when did we go wrong? So of course that was a huge effort, was to go back to the beginning, go back to the primordial soup. You know, that after the Big Bang, where sort of everything sort of writhed together in this soup, which is hard to imagine. Although you can imagine it if you go through Google, as I've done, various microscope photographs of life in ponds. So suddenly my little animated figures had a purpose. There could be a story. So they could be bumping into each other, having little relationships, conflicts. And I mean, I did do a bit of work on tit for tat, and so there was that part of it. But I think that this whole world, which I'm only sort of on the edge of and know so little about, totally captivated me. I haven't solved any of the world's problems yet.
Well, that's still to come. It's funny because I've seen those figures that you're referring to in your animations when we're sitting together editing. I've looked at them quite intently. There's dancing figures, all sorts of figures, just animated little loops. And it's funny because I'd never connected those to that idea that you've just illustrated of the primordial soup, and that those figures, you know, come from the beginning of time.
I think that's kind of overstating. I think that it's more like if one could imagine, one could do anything. And if you're one of my blobs, you can do absolutely anything. So there's lots of choice, and there are lots of scenarios that could perhaps be played out.
So Nick, just tell me a little more about your relationship with the audience. Tell me what it is that you think the audience sees in the work, And, you know, what does somebody encounter when they look at one of your animations?
I would think that, well, I think that the reactions I get is that they're decorative, they're lovely, that they're entertaining. And that brings me to the real dilemma with everything like this, is that I wasn't trying to do something that was lovely. I was struggling in my own little way, finding a way to say things that were important. And, you know, that is the mountain to be climbed. And maybe it's impossible to do something that somebody would like to see and yet convey a message. And I know people who write in the theatre, people do it and they achieve it, and it is achieved with some paintings. But in this medium, I'm not sure how to do it, but I'm going to keep on trying.
That's interesting, isn't it? The idea that your audience finds something aesthetic in these animations that isn't intended. I wonder whether that's to do with the fact that the artworks are actually succeeding in that they are conveying a message. The audience sees it and kind of absorbs that message and goes away interpreting that as some kind of aesthetic experience.
That's very, very hard to know, and I think this is a very difficult question, and I suppose I need the answer. If I had the answer, then I could say yes. So this is the way that I could hit that little button that makes them think, hang on, this thing about our way of life isn't really sensible. And I have worries as to whether you can really do it just with abstracts. But, you know, one does what one can with what skills you've got.
Tell me more about who you're collaborating with now and this new thing, which is about adding audio, sound, music to your animated work.
I was fortunate enough to spend a whole year listening to improvising musicians, the Hullabaloo group in Taunton. This idea of just creating things in sound, completely abstract. And I thought, that's what I'm trying to do. And I mentioned it to one or two of them. And as a result, I was asked to, or it was suggested that I did some animations which they would then respond to musically. One major sort of intellectual problem about it is that they were doing spontaneous music and they were following me. So hang on a second, am I writing a score? Am I taking away their spontaneous whatever it is? And what do I know about music? How can I write a score for musicians? So there's that, and there's a kind of little sort of argument about, you know, chickens and eggs, you know, what begins first and things like that. But okay, if I am doing animations for musicians to follow, I first of all needed to think about what it's like to play a musical instrument. You know, you pick it up and you set it up and you play it, and you're not going to do it in 3 seconds or half a second, which is what I'm playing with an animating thing. You're doing, you know, if you get 6 pictures per second, you're pretty bloody slow, really. So there was that thing, was to understand, to create things of a length, so which is stretching the thing out. And as you stretched it out, it became more boring because it was just, and more boring to do as well. And so I then realized that to make the thing work, you know, if it was going to be stretched out to 3 minutes, which has seemed a lifetime for me, or 20 minutes like a proper, you know, side of a CD or something, I was going to have to produce these incredibly long animations, and there would have to be a narrative. So I went off to try and learn how to write narratives. And I went to one person who was doing creative writing, and it never ever was able to get over the fact that I wasn't going to use any words.
That's interesting. The idea that you're using new digital technology to create your animations, but there's a sense in which, you know, you're returning back to the early days of cinema, creating silent film.
Well, you know, maybe once we're into these new worlds, a story becomes something different. Maybe that's what you're saying.
So Nick, you've been collaborating recently with Tim Hill and Hullabaloo and that whole kind of improvisational music scene. Where do you hope that takes you next? What do you hope you get from those collaborations? And have you got any dates in the diary?
I think that it depends quite a lot on the pandemic, and you know how far, whether we're heading into another lockdown or what at the moment. And there have been conversations about events. I would like to. I think one of the things that I would like to do would be to make it something that was of benefit to other people, or young people, particularly young people who've, you know, been shut up in their houses. They want to get out, and they need. And the trouble is, it needs possibly some way of earning an income, really.
Okay, Nick, thanks very much for that insight into your practice. Let's hope that those dates with Hullabaloo can actually take place soon, sooner rather than later. Like all live performances, it's kind of a little bit up in the air at the moment, isn't it? Thanks very much.
Yeah, and thank you for laying this on, because it's very important to me that what's given me so much pleasure, it can give pleasure to other people if they take it up and explore it further.
So we're going to finish off the Creative Network with 3 short animated sequences. They're about 2 minutes each. And they're examples of the collaborative work Nick has been doing recently, 2 of which are with Tim Hill and the Hullabaloo, and another one with the musician Leary Hasson.